Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to 8 wild animals that you only find in America. Now, this is by Lost in the Pond, Lawrence from Lost in the Pond. He spent, the bulk of his life in the UK, but he's now spent over a decade in the US. So it's going to be interesting to see what animals, are pretty much unique to the US. The US is obviously a much larger country than the UK. From the top of my head, you guys probably... Bears, we don't have bears here. Although I think there's been like false sightings of bears in recent years, but as far as I know, we don't have bears. What else? Coyotes and alligators. I don't think we have alligators here either, but it's going to be interesting to see what else makes this list. I think you guys pretty much have every animal apart from maybe lions and tigers. I'm talking about in the wild. I'm sure you've got some in captivity, but yeah, this should be a really, really fun video. I like this sort of thing, learning about where animals typically are found, so I can know, okay, don't go swimming in that lake, there's crocodiles in there or something. So yeah, let's do it.
Until the tour guide just casually pointed at the trees and said, oh, yeah, there's 8 bald eagles. What? Actually,
yes,
that's amazing.
Bald eagles.
Show it, make them fly. They're not remote controlled. They don't work like that.
Actually, no, they're not on the flag, but they're America's animal.
Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those pertains to nature, specifically wild animals. It feels like quite a while since I've seen any wild animals, unless you count my cat, who is an animal and is wild. And so because I'm still in quarantine and I crave nature, I thought this would be another good addition to the spring series that I've been doing. We've looked at the uproarious nature in which both countries have introduced invasive species to one another. We've also looked at how Britain doesn't have anything on America when it comes to domesticated pets. And so I thought it would be interesting, particularly for you Americans, to see kind of how unique some of your wildlife is. Some of the animals on this list, I should say, are endemic not just to the United States, but North America, sometimes South America, and then you will find sort of...
Because there's a lot of bears in Canada as well, like brown bears and grizzlies.
Instances of some of these dotted around the planet, but none of them cropped up in Britain with the very possible exception of this. Raccoons. The only real experience I had of them growing up in England was playing Super Mario Bros. 3, and that doesn't really count. So I was thrilled to bits to discover that they're a real animal, and they definitely exist here in North America. Just leave your bins out for 2 weeks, and then you'll discover them, although in Britain you don't get a choice over that duration. Whenever I hear about raccoons from Americans, it's usually in the context of what utter pests they are, going through your trash and stealing your discarded receipts, and then assuming your financial information. But aside from all that, they are quite adorable, to look at, right? They've got these huge bushy tails.
Yeah, they are quite cool. They look quite similar to skunks, don't they?
Is always fun, and they're amazing, but it looks like they have been slightly distributed around the world, or at least introduced. And while I did hear that some of them were introduced to Britain, that's got nothing on Germany. Look at this map. It's off the charts. I had no idea that Germans were so acquainted with raccoons. Same with Japan. Japan! That explains the raccoon suit in Mario 3, though it doesn't explain why Mario turns into a statue while wearing one. Do raccoons do that in Japan? I have no idea. And that's because I didn't grow up with them or live in Japan.
Groundhog.
Whether you call them whistle pigs, woodchucks, or groundhogs, it's the same animal, essentially, and they're to be found mostly, when we're talking about America, in the eastern portion.
Can you eat groundhog? Because it's a type of pig, so you should be able to, right? Or does it carry diseases?
Of the United States, which probably explains why I've encountered one. I lived in Indiana for about 8 years before moving to Chicago, and especially while I lived in rural Indiana, you saw all manner of wildlife, and one of these was no exception. They love to burrow, don't they? And then they emerge from that burrow, usually on February 2nd.
I was very wrong there.
I'm joking. I don't think there's any science behind that. But of course, February 2nd in the United States and Canada.
But from the name Groundhog, you would assume that it's a kind of pig, wouldn't you?
is Groundhog Day, right? And I'd heard of Groundhog Day only in the context of the film with Bill Murray. I didn't know it was an actual thing, which goes back to apparently the Pennsylvania Dutch, who were superstitious, and they said that when the groundhog emerged on February 2nd, if it saw its own shadow, because, you know, the weather was clear, then that would mean that winter would go on. But if it didn't, it meant spring was imminent. This has turned out to also not be scientifically sound, and there's absolutely no evidence that it holds true. But that's not going to stop us in this day and age, is it? Even though we have the internet. In fact, no, especially because we have the internet. Tragically, groundhogs have clearly distributed themselves around the continent to form the shape of a flattened groundhog, perhaps as a warning to motorists.
I mean, groundhogs, they look fairly harmless. They look like giant sort of guinea pigs to me. Or are they still a bit of a pest? They don't look like pests.
So I remember my first encounter with a skunk, but it wasn't with the mammal itself,
a cool-looking animal,
but rather with its zesty and intoxicating aroma. How I miss the outdoors. Somebody needs to make a skunk-based perfume. That would be... we checked. They have, in fact, done that, which
Why
is
would they
pretty
do
bizarre,
that?
because for my British viewers, I was joking a moment ago. It's one of the most pungent and nasally raw...
Who would buy a perfume that reeks of skunk? Maybe it's like a prank for you to spray on people you don't like. You know, oh, do you want to try this new eau de toilette?
Raucous smells you'll ever experience, and you'll know it when you smell it. At first I had to ask though, because I started to think that Indiana just naturally smelled like arse. And it wouldn't have just been Indiana. I mean, striped skunks are found more or less in the entire United States, and some people keep them as pets. And what I want to know right now is, how's quarantine working out for you? I mean, do you let them in the house? Do they let rip in the kitchen? I've heard that odour is only emitted when they feel threatened. So I suppose presumably, since they're a pet, that's not very often. Although if my cat's anything to go by, it'll be every time the garbage men turn up. And then it's just competing smells.
Virginia
Don't be fooled by the name. This beautiful creature, the Virginia opossum, can be found in many quarters of the United States.
Before.
In fact, if you remember that video I did recently on trees, the distribution of opossums seems to be loosely connected to the distribution of forests. Now, as I
an opossum is the same animal as a possum, isn't it?
discovered on Twitter this week, if you live in Minnesota or Wisconsin and you're looking at this map and thinking, why aren't my opossums represented? That's not fair. It's because this map is slightly out of date, but I do understand that some have ventured up into those two states. The bigger question about this map, though, is what the heck is going on at the Washington-Oregon border? It looks like some sort of marsupial boundary dispute.
Yeah.
That's the Columbia River.
The Columbia River runs along that border. Why don't you find opossums along other riverways as well on this map? I'm not sure there's a lot of love out there.
Maybe
for
they were
opossums,
brought there,
and it's easy to see why. They generally look quite silly. Unlike these adorable bastards.
Whitetail.
So just to
deer.
clarify, deer absolutely exist in the United Kingdom, and just like in the United States, you normally encounter them when you're hitting them with your car. But we don't have the same
honestly.
kind of deer, and when I
Like, I was driving from London to Birmingham and I saw, you know, the remains of a deer on the side of the motorway, and it was just tragic. It's just like, because there's nothing you can really do. You can't swerve out of the way, especially if you're going at like 70 or 80 miles an hour, because there's a car in the next lane. So it's like you just got, there's nothing you can do. It's just kind of sad.
lived in Indiana, I would see deer quite regularly, you know, just sometimes just meandering through a wood and across a road. It's their own fault in many ways. And in Indiana and much of the east of the United States and even some of the west, you're most likely to encounter what is known as a white-tailed deer. Why is it called that? Because it's a deer and it has a white tail. In all fairness to them and all deer around the world, they are absolutely adorable, or should that be adorable? Sorry about that. And our next entry is no exception.
Mule deer.
A mule deer, that's the other really prominent type of deer that you'll find in the United States, specifically out west. Now, I obviously live in the Midwest and I spend most of my time here, but I have encountered a mule deer. Not here, but in Salt Lake City. I did have to clarify with the internet this week that that is what this is, but you can tell.
Looks pretty regal with, you know, those antlers. Looks like quite a a regal looking animal. You know what I mean?
In fact, there are a number of ways you can tell. Number one, make sure it doesn't have a white tail. One of the subspecies of a mule deer is the black-tailed deer. But if you're not so inclined to look at its arse, then rearrange the letters and look at its ears. Arse is an anagram of ears. A mule deer has some absolutely enormous lugs, just
It
like
actually is.
a mule or Prince Charles.
And by Prince Charles, he now means King Charles.
The bald eagle. Now, you don't usually find America's national bird hovering over the skies of Chicago. And outside of seeing this one at Indianapolis Zoo, I don't think I'd really encountered them in the wild until that trip out west. It was amazing. I was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I was taking one of those boat tours of the big lake. It was beautiful, right? But I wasn't expecting much more than just a nice, relaxing boat ride with beautiful scenery. Until the tour guide just casually pointed at the trees and said, oh, yeah, there's 8 bald eagles. What? What? Actually, that's amazing. Show me, make them fly. They're not remote controlled. They don't work like that.
Bald eagles are amazing looking birds, man. Amazing looking birds. You can obviously see why, you know, the US chose it as its like official animal. It's just a really like boss looking bird, like.
And I think one of them did. It hovered down toward the water because they generally populate themselves around large waterways because they're keen on fishing. And they're an absolutely stunning animal. I mean, they look amazing. I mean, look at those talons.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting fact about them. They're not bald, right? The name actually comes from the fact that when that name was given, the word bald just meant white-headed. And all I can think is, has anybody told the birds? I bet they're really self-conscious.
Coyote.
Coyotes are found all across the United States to the extent that many years ago during this past February, one even showed up outside of our door in Chicago. Between these 2 narrow fences that we have outside, it had gotten itself stuck, which really didn't do anything for tired old coyote staring.
How often, guys, on a daily basis do you come across wild animals? Because here, I've not seen a wild animal in well over a month. Like, well over a month. So do you guys see them on a daily basis? And by wild animals, I mean, you know, animals on this list, for example. Like, how often?
Stereotypes perpetuated by Looney Tunes. Now, before I could get to it, it had actually freed itself, which is a shame because I just turned to my wife and said, oh, can we get one? But they're not domestic animals, so don't get any bright ideas. They eat small rodents, they eat rabbits, and they attack chickens. So it's sort of like me when I was 9. You know, be careful of them, be wary. They don't typically attack humans, but it has been known to happen in the past. And I thought I should just mention that as a kind of warning to any British people or anybody coming to the United States that sort of encounters these and thinks they're just a general dog, because they are from the canine family. Maybe don't pet them. All that said, to bring this video entirely full circle, they also hunt and sometimes kill raccoons, which is sort of the real-life equivalent of the T-Rex eating the raptors in Jurassic Park. That's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below your favourite wild...
Fun video. None of those animals have I ever seen in the flesh, apart from deer, and I'm trying to think... Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about in the wild, not in a zoo or anything like that. So yeah, I think deer are the only thing, and maybe skunks, but it could have been a squirrel or something. Yeah, the US obviously has a lot more wildlife, and it's just a testament to how, you know, diverse the landscapes are. You've pretty much got every kind of landscape that's possible, really. So you're going to have the animals that are quite unique to those places within, you know, the boundaries of the country. Like I mentioned in the video, I wonder how often the average person comes across one of these animals, and if you guys sort of are trained to know how to deal with one, for example, that's coming at you. Do you know what to do? Do you just kind of kick it or shoo it away, or do you have to carry things like bear spray in your bags? Let me know. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.